All your bones inside you, call the skeletal system. Giving you strength and structure so that you won't flop around. And each bone got a function, that 206 of them. 70% of each bone is made from calcium. Shot like Pascal. The cranium protects the brain, the mandible. Jaw to Fuki teeth and place the clavicle. The collarbone, there's two of them. Makes the scapula.
Okay, some killer intro music there again, guys. You're welcome. You can find that killer song here on this link, Cook the PowerPoint. If you couldn't tell from the song or the only word on this PowerPoint slide, today, in this video, we're talking about bones. Before we do, let's talk about skeletons. Not the kind of skeletons that come out at Halloween. I'm talking about the skeletons that make up the internal and external support systems of various living organisms. So skeletons provide animals with form and shape. So they help them maintain their three-dimensional shape, and skeletons also allow for places for muscles to attach so that organisms can move. There are three types of skeletons: hydrostatic skeletons, exoskeletons, and endoskeletons. The first one you've probably never heard of before. It's called a hydrostatic skeleton. Here, muscles push against fluid inside the body walls. This is a sea anemone. Pretty freaky looking, and it's got muscles and it's full of water. And so what happens is those muscles push against the water that it's absorbed, and that's what gives it its, three-dimensional structure. If a sea anemone were to undergo catastrophe and be washed ashore on land, and some of that water would leak out, the sea anemone would look like just a mess, just a big puddle of tissues. So hydrostatic skeletons only work best for animals that can stay wet, that can stay underwater or in wet environments. And if they dry out, hydrostatic skeletons break down. Lots of trouble. So like an earthworm, it has a hydrostatic skeleton. There's no bones in an earthworm, but if an earthworm crawls out on the sidewalk and the sun comes out, that earthworm is in trouble, y'all. Compare that with exo and endoskeletons. Exoskeleton means their skeleton is on the outside. So arthropods, not arthropods, arthropods have an exoskeleton. What are arthropods, you ask? Well, bugs, crabs, lobsters, shrimp. Their skeleton is on the inside. They don't have bones on the inside. If you've ever eaten a shrimp, and I'm sure you have, then you had to peel that shrimp before you ate it. What were you doing? You were ripping off its skeleton to get the delicious muscles inside. So exoskeletons are on the outside. And what happens is this external skeleton provides attachment points for internal muscles. So this is a slice through the thorax, this section here of a fly. So this line is its exoskeleton. These pink things are muscles. So for a fly to flap its wings, it's kind of cool. These muscles actually pull on the exoskeleton, and as these muscles pull down, the wings go up, and as these muscles pull lengthwise, the wings go down. Or is it vice versa? I don't remember, but the point is insects move by having their muscles tug on their exoskeleton. So how do you know if a skeleton has an exoskeleton? How do you know if a organism has an exoskeleton or not? Well, if you step on it and it goes crunch, it has an exoskeleton. If you step on it and it goes squish, it has a hydrostatic skeleton. And if you step on it and it goes ow, then it probably has an endoskeleton. So an endoskeleton is a skeleton that's on the inside, internal bones. You can see this guy. This is an ancient Permian reptile. And you can see that it has a similar internal skeletal structure to a mammal or a crocodile. So it's got a vertebral column and rib cage. It's got a pelvis. It's got legs hanging off that. It's got a pectoral girdle with arms hanging off that. And then it's got a skull. So this is kind of similar to what we have. So internal skeleton has internal bones, and those internal bones also allow muscles to attach in order to facilitate movement. Can you hear my kids are listening to The Sound of Music really loud right now? And my wife is on the phone? I don't know if you can hear that, but I sure can. Okay, the skeleton invertebrates, so animals with a backbone, these animals have a bunch of little bones called vertebrae, and the vertebrae surround the spinal cord, right? So collectively, we often call all of these vertebrae the backbone. What does the backbone do? Well, the spinal cord runs through the middle of these vertebrae. So here's a vertebrae, and here's the spinal cord running through it. So this helps protect it. All right. We also have muscles that are attached to our spinal cord. So do a sit-up and you're pulling on muscles that are on your spinal cord. And then your spinal cord, or your backbone, I should say. I've been saying spinal cord this whole time. I should have been saying backbone. But whatever. Your backbone also helps distribute weight over your body. You also have intervertebral discs in between your vertebrae. So here's one. We're looking down. So here's the spinal cord. Here's an individual vertebra. And kind of on this flat section of the vertebra is an intervertebral disc. Here's a side view. So you can see these discs are in between your vertebrae. So they act like shock absorbers. So they're basically cartilage filled with fluid, and they help keep your vertebrae from rubbing against each other. If you've ever had a slipped disc, then that's when your disc basically gets out of position and your vertebrae are rubbing together, and it doesn't feel good. Here are the major bones of the skeleton. I put arrows next to the ones that you're probably going to see on the test, so I'm hitting the highlights. Your skull is made up of cranial bones. You've actually got lots of bones that make up your skull. There they are. Your rib cage is made up of bones, and these bones kind of transition to cartilage, but the point is your rib cage helps protect your lungs, and this bone right here is your sternum, right, or breastbone. It connects the two sides of your rib cage. Skipping down to the legs, you got one giant bone in the middle of your upper leg. That's called your femur. You have a kneecap or patella, which is a bone on your knee. You can probably reach down and wiggle it right now. Then you have two big bones in your lower leg. You've got a tibia and a fibula. The tibia is the larger of the two. Then you've got a bunch of ankle bones. These are called tarsals. Then you've got foot bones or metatarsals. And then your toes have a bone in them called a phalange. Moving back up, the pectoral girdle consists of a clavicle right here. So the most frequently broken bone in the human body. The scapula is your shoulder blade. And then in your arm, you've got one big bone called the humerus. In your lower arm, you've got two bones, the radius and the ulna. And then you've got wrist bones called carpals, hand bones called metacarpals, and finger bones called phalanges. I've already talked about the backbone. That's just a kid screaming in the background, not a big deal. We've got vertebrae making up your backbone, like we talked about before, and then your tailbone or coccyx, which, if you've ever been sledding, you've probably bruised this bad boy. What do bones do? 5 things. 1, they allow movement by interacting with muscles. 2, they provide support for muscles and body parts. 3, they protect internal organs and tissues, so they help protect from injury. I mentioned the rib cage, that's a good example. 4, bones provide mineral storage, so we store good stuff like calcium and phosphorus in our bones. If you're low on if you're low on calcium or low on phosphorus, your body can just pull it out of your bones, storage. And then your bones make blood, all right? But this is only in some bones, especially larger bones like your femur. But the point is, your blood is produced by your bones. I mentioned in a previous lecture that your bones are made out of cells that secrete calcium, and then those bones kind of get trapped in the calcium. All right, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. 206 bones in your body. The biggest one is your femur, right here. And the smallest one is you have these teeny little bones the size of a grain of rice in your middle ear. Bone consists of both compact bone and spongy bone. So one bone is made of both types in different proportions. So compact bone is really strong and dense, And contrary to popular opinion, there are nerves and blood vessels in your bone. Not a ton of blood vessels, but there are some. It shouldn't be a surprise that there's nerves in your bones because if you've ever broken a bone, which I have, it's pretty painful. And so that's because the nerves in the bone are letting you know something bad has happened. Spongy bone has more air spaces, so you can see it looks like this. Why is it spongy? Well, it's lightweight. It's still pretty strong, but those air spaces make it lighter. And spongy bone can contain marrow, which we'll talk about in just a second. Your bones are wrapped in connective tissue. Okay, so I mentioned bone marrow. There's two types, red bone marrow and yellow bone marrow. So red bone marrow is where your blood gets made, and it's found inside of that spongy bone tissue. So look at this femur. Here it's been sliced away so you can see inside. Here you can see the spongy bone tissue, and your red bone marrow is going to be in there. So your red blood cells are going to be made in here and then pumped out, or they get drawn out through your through arteries and veins and put into circulation. Yellow bone marrow is really adipose tissue. It's fat, right? And we find it in the central part of the bone. So down here we can see how bones develop. So when we're first born, our bones are still pretty hollow, so a lot more spongy. Got a lot of cartilage on the outside. You'll see more of that in the next slide. And as we age and develop, our bones get stronger. And so yellow bone marrow replaces the red bone marrow. And by the time that we are your age, at least, we have a bunch of yellow bone marrow on the inside, and then there's red bone marrow in the spongy bone tissue on the ends. The yellow bone marrow, again, is fat, so it stores energy reserve, but it can be converted into red bone marrow or into red marrow if you need more blood being produced. When you're a little baby, I mentioned in a previous lecture that your bones were mostly cartilage, so we're more bouncy when we're babies. And then as we age, the bones become more, shall we say, bony. The cartilage gets replaced by bone tissue. So you can see that here. So when we're still inside mama, we're mostly cartilage, and there's some bone tissue forming. And then as we age, then there's less and less cartilage until eventually our bones are mostly bone tissue, and then there's some cartilage on the ends. Bones don't just get made and then stay there, they're alive. So the bones in your body are undergoing repair and replacement all the time. So there are cells that break down part of the bone and then build new bones. So the bones that you have right now in your body aren't made out of the same cells and tissues that they were 10 years ago, nor will they be the same 10 years from now. So your bones are constantly replacing themselves. Pretty cool. Your bone density increases until you're in your mid-20s. That's because of this. So the density and strength of your bones increases until you're in your mid-20s. You guys have some strong bones, y'all. But then bone density declines as you get older, like me. And so that's natural. Your bones get more brittle and weaker as you get older. And osteoporosis is a disease when your bone density declines to a particular level. So sometimes this can happen because of diet. So if you don't get enough calcium or vitamin D, or you're smoking and drinking a bunch, then that's hard on your body, and basically your bones become more brittle. So this is like normal spongy bone, and this is spongy bone with osteoporosis. You can see how much more air spaces there are and how much more brittle it would be. Joints. Joints are areas where two bones come into contact. So you've got lots of joints all over your body, your wrists, your fingers, your elbows, your ankle, your knee, so on. Joints come in two categories, two main types, ball and socket joints and hinge joints. So think about your shoulder and hips. These are ball and socket joints, so named because the end of your leg or arm bone is shaped like a ball, and then the joint of your shoulder or your pelvis is shaped more like a socket. So if you think about your shoulder, you can move your arm around, pitch a baseball, spike a volleyball, whatever, and that movement is because of the ball and socket structure of your shoulder joint. Hinge joints are like hinges on a door. They're good at moving in one particular direction, so your elbows and knees are hinge joints. And so again, your knee works really great moving your lower leg forwards and backwards, but hinge joints don't do real well when it starts moving side to side or twisting. Joints have cartilage in them that prevents the bones from rubbing together. You can see that pretty well in this picture. So here's the femur of your upper leg. Here's your tibia and fibula of your lower leg. And so you can see the end of your femur is wrapped in cartilage. And then you've got this meniscus, which is kind of like a shock absorber of cartilage. So whenever you're walking or running or jumping, then the cartilage is touching cartilage and it's not bone on bone. So that just makes things more comfortable. Pretty cool. Joints also have ligaments that connect bone to bone. So there are ligaments in your knee, for example, that are holding your femur to your tibia or your fibula. Right? So all these different ligaments. There are different problems with joints. So osteoarthritis is when the cartilage I was just talking about wears down, and then your bones rub together. So if somebody had a job where they were doing the same motion over and over, like they were sewing for years and years, for example, or doing something with their hands, the cartilage can break down and the bones rub together, and that's painful. Another type of arthritis is rheumatoid arthritis, and this is when your immune system gets confused and for some reason it attacks your joints and it inflames your joints and leads to swelling of the joints, and it's pretty painful as well. Tendons and ligaments are involved in motion. So tendons are dense connective tissue that we talked about in a previous video, and it connects muscle to bone. Ligaments connect bone to bone. So here's an upper arm, so here's a bicep. So your bicep muscle has tendons on one end that connect it to the upper part of your humerus, and then it has tendons on the bottom side that connect to your lower arm. Right? The Achilles tendon is another example that I mentioned previously. Ligaments connect bone to bone, so these are all the different ligaments in a knee. So there's lateral cruciate ligaments and medial cruciate ligaments and ACL and PCL and so on, anterior and posterior. And these ligaments help connect your femur to your tibia and fibula. So if you've ever injured your knee, probably what happened was you were moving side to side or running in a way that caused your knee to kind of move sideways, and then you ripped one of these ligaments or injured one of these ligaments. That takes a long time to heal because the ligaments don't have as much blood flow. They're just slow to heal. Strains and sprains are injuries to tendons or muscles or ligaments. So a strain is what happens when you stretch too far a muscle or tendon. So it's over here actually. So here you've got these tendons that connect your muscles in your lower leg to your foot. So if you roll your ankle, you might strain and stretch these tendons. Owie. A sprain is when you injure a ligament. So again, ligaments attach bones, and if you were to roll your ankle here and you were to sprain these ligaments, then that's going to weaken this joint, and it's going to mean this bone can slide around on top of this bone, and so your joint becomes unstable. So a sprain is a bigger deal than a strain. And if you've ever injured your ankle and gotten an ankle sprain, you went to the doctor and they gave you maybe a grade on that sprain. So a normal ankle is going to have a ligament that looks like this, nice and healthy. Grade 1 means you ripped it a little bit and there's some stretching and tears. Grade 2, good job, it's a bigger tear. Grade 3, you tore it in half, and that's really bad. All right, so this is going to heal much faster than this for obvious reasons. Ooh, the end of the lecture. Next up, we're going to talk about muscles.